Welcome to our viewers in the Americas and around the world. I'm Doug Ferber from Tieline, the codec company, and you've accessed the video podcast version of Streamline. I'm joined here by Jacob Daniluck. Hi, Jacob.
Hello.
He's Tieline's U.S. codec expert. And today's guest is Jay Chapman, CEO of Woof Boom Radio, owner and operator of radio stations in Lafayette, Anderson, Muncie, Indiana, and Lima, Ohio. Hi, Jay, and thanks for taking time to be with us today. And we're going to ask you a few questions, if that's all right.
Doug, that sounds great. Things are different for all of us right now. We all have a couple of minutes and different time intervals, and so it's all
Excellent.
good.
So, Jacob, I'm going to kind of let you get things started and introduce yourself a little bit if you want, and we'll get this thing rolling.
Yeah, as Doug said, I'm Jacob Daniluck. I'm our U.S. sales technical expert here. I work out of the Indianapolis office, and let's just dive into it. And real quick, just so everybody's clear, and for those who are curious, Jay, can you answer me a basic question? I know you probably know the answer to. What's the meaning of Woof Boom Radio? What's the story behind that? There's got to be something there.
Well, I always say when somebody does that, because it's like 90% of the people that I come in contact with that haven't heard about Woof Boom Radio, and the only reason the other 10% don't say something is because they think, well, gosh, I probably should know what it is, but it's a throwback. Where our stations are based, there was a group of radio stations back in the day in the 60s and 70s, an AM/FM combo and a TV station. And the calls on those stations were WFBM. And the handle that they referred to it, I mean, it was Woof Boom, and it was Woof Boom Radio, and it was Woof Boom TV, and they had Woof Boom personalities. They had a St. Bernard. There was the Woof Boom mascot. And so, no, we don't have a St. Bernard. There are chickens out back of one of our radio stations. Yep. And that's for another day. But no, we picked that handle up because it resonated with people that were long-term broadcasters, and it spoke to the passion that people have in our industry. And so it made sense for us to do it with a nod to the past of a successful group of radio and TV stations.
Well, excellent. I learned something today. I mean, we've been doing business for years, and you've been a very valued customer, and I've just never thought about asking you, and it just jogged the other day that I'm curious, and I bet others are too. So thank you for answering that.
You'd be shocked how many radio stations have pets. There was a guy in Oklahoma named his company Chucky Broadcasting. Chucky was a Cocker Spaniel.
Did he have a Chucky mascot?
Yeah, he was a Cocker Spaniel.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's dive into what everybody's here to kind of hear about from the Woof Boom perspective. With this whole COVID-19 outbreak and this whole shelter-in-place quarantine, if you want to call it that, is in place, what are some of the things that you were challenged with and that required you to prepare? I guess my first question is real basic. Were you guys prepared? And if not, what did you guys have to do to get prepared?
I want to meet the person that was prepared for everything that we've all had to face over the last month, because, I think we always tried to anticipate things as best as we could. And for any of us in the business, as you're making decisions on technology or how you want to build your organization out, you have to make certain bets. And so there were some things that we had done that prepared us well for this. There were a number of other things, I think, where we were behind, as I talked to some of my counterparts or peers elsewhere. From the most basic standpoint, if you think of our organization in terms of how radio stations were built and how they operated, we were very much the same, for all practical purposes. If you think of the physical motions of a person walking in as they were going to do their shift, or walking in the morning as they were going to begin their workday, the same way people had always done radio. And so, the technology has existed for a number of years for people to work remotely, but we weren't set up that way. And whether it was our automation system or the way we wanted to connect people on the outside, or from the business side, we had rolled out remote desktop and such for users in the business environment, but we really didn't take it to the level that we needed to do. And so within a 2-week period of time, we really accelerated that. And we've still got a ways to go with a number of products, but I'm so thankful today that we had the basic infrastructure and the institutional knowledge on the inside, whether it's working with codecs or whether it's doing things like deploying our software in a way that all users can get to it.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I definitely do agree. If somebody was prepared for this outbreak, I'd like to meet them too, personally. But going back to, like, I was a Boy Scout, I think Doug was, a lot of us were. Being prepared is definitely one thing.
I only made it to first class.
Okay, so we're all Boy Scouts here.
And I got my fishing merit badge because it said catch a fish in any sportsmanlike manner, and on a canoe trip, we had a smallmouth bass jump in the canoe. So that passed.
You qualify.
Then there we go. So yeah, that be prepared motto has always sat with me. And that's why I've been kind of curious about how many stations were actually truly prepared for it. But as you kind of said, anybody who's prepared for an outbreak, that's insane to an extent. And I'd like to do them too.
So Jacob, we had done little things over the years, and I think most organizations do things like this. You try and do little stress tests, and one of those might be, well, we're planning for a disaster, in this day and age, we know that there's things that take place at the schools, and we've got a school down the street, and so how do we deal with that? But we weren't prepared to evacuate or vacate our buildings for a long period of time. And so as you start gaming those kind of things out, we all try and draw on things that we know. But a good exercise is just to put the stress on the organization. We had done that before. And I had seen organizations, being a lifelong broadcaster, that are in moments of stress. And so you try and plan for those things, but it's really having to depend on people that you consider key thinkers on the outside. And when you don't have things, who are the partners on the outside that can help you do those types of things? And early on in this process, we reached out to Tieline, and it wasn't necessarily for some of the codecs, but some of the other things that you guys offer, because we knew that we were not in a place where we could get everything accomplished with our own resources. And it's having conversations, but it's also using the knowledge of other people, and you can't be afraid to do that. We've had to do that in so many ways over the last month.
What would you do different, Jay, in terms of remote broadcasting at home? What would you do now to prepare for another 100-year crisis, if we were to have one 10 years from now?
So, Doug, that's, and I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about our business from both a business standpoint, but also from a product standpoint. So I have had so many, for example, we're on a Zoom call right here. Our staff is on Zoom calls throughout the day, and we're using this technology to connect us in a way so there's a personal human connection with one another. And we're doing the same type of thing to a lesser degree with our customers and such. But we do this because we're trying to work with what we know. And so one of the things that we would do differently is we would have done a better job of deploying our remote infrastructure farther ahead. And whether that's making sure that we've got the connectivity for people on the business side of our business or on our on-air side, we would make sure that the connectivity is there, so we've got a reliable way to get back and forth between studios or offices. And then the second thing is, as much as we can, make sure that people are beginning to become comfortable in working in a different way, because part of what hinders all of us in a situation like this is we're in a different environment. We're in, not just that we don't have some of the resources that we have when we're in an on-air studio, but we have to think differently. And so by pushing us to do some of these things differently, I think if we would have gotten ahead of it earlier and tested ourselves in some ways, we probably would have been better prepared to think about how do we work through a tough situation.
Well, and I think that brings up a great point to bring up the next question about communication in the office, because that's definitely a big thing when you're used to working around everybody and having your on-air talent right down the hall from you in another office maybe, or in the studio right there where you can actually go and talk to them. How has the communication been altogether, as well as not just between like yourself and your employees? What about like the engineers and the on-air staff and getting stuff accomplished and set up and working where both people are not in the same room half the time potentially?
Right.
Um,
So to that end, I guess there's two things that immediately come to mind. Is
Mhm.
number one, an organization that does not have a strong value system that is based on things like values that are in place to create trust, and values that are in place to create meaningful relationships. I think it'd be really hard for an organization like that to be able to function well when there's a lot of stressors that are put on it. And right now, there's a lot of stressors that are being put on every organization. So I think that is really important. From a process or a procedure standpoint, we're old school. We like to go down the hall and stick our head in a studio, an office, in a sales bullpen, and connect with people. So we're trying to use technology like Zoom and not go to the phone, where we can actually make human contact. Every direct report in our organization right now has to meet with their supervisor once daily via Zoom. Every department needs to meet weekly, regardless of the market. Each market needs to meet once weekly, and every other week we're doing a company-wide meeting. We're a small group. We're just about 50 employees, but those kind of things, being an old school organization, and I don't say that in a bad way. That's what I'm 58. It's what I grew up with, but that's how most of us are accustomed to working. And so we needed to be sensitive to that. Once it became apparent that we were going to be disconnected from the physical thing that had tied us all together.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, no, that's definitely the biggest thing is, as you said, it's nice going down, peeking your head into the studio and asking what's going on, or have those weekly meetings. So yeah, that's definitely the biggest, probably the most important thing right now, in my opinion. So I'm glad to hear your thoughts on that too. But I guess should we maybe talk a little bit about what most people are probably tuning in for about remote products here specifically? What have some of your home studios look like, if you don't mind me asking? Some of the announcer setups or on-air talent. So what are they working with right now?
And can I add a second part to that question? Um,
Mhm.
would you consider, now that you've been through this, installing more permanent gear in your important in the homes of your important content players?
Yeah, so I'll give you an idea of what, and it's going to vary by market for us, because unfortunately, as we've built out, like a lot of companies, you inherit certain infrastructure, and whereas we might have next gen for an automation system in one area, and another area we would have audio. And so that brings, and not being on the most current version of Audio Vault, there's certain ways that we would track if we're there. Next gen with the more current version lends itself to tracking or live in a very different way. So, I think if you look at, there's not uniformity company-wide, but we've tried to take processes and make them uniform so we can think through them in the best possible way, because we do have people that are working on multiple systems. And so we try and be cognizant of that. I'll go around, I think, Jacob, to your question and come back to yours, Doug. My introduction to Tieline was probably a little bit more than 10 years ago when we were setting up our first over-the-air IP, as I was operating stations in Illinois at the time. And, as we started to work it, we saw the potential, or what was really exciting with this is, we could interconnect multiple transmitter sites and have areas of redundancy that were built in. And so I think we always looked at the codecs as providing us a lot more with just providing an over-the-air STL. And so we began using them more recently out in the field as we were setting up remotes and things like that. I'm an old school guy. I used to run up a Yagi antenna and do a remote sports show that way. And so it was hard for me to get away from a bad Marty sound, because working a Tieline codec now makes it sound like, you know, that as long as the acoustics, and the acoustics are not good in this room, but that you could really be in the studio. So, you know, it was important to us to get things deployed in a way that we could manage it. And so our area of comfort was with those codecs, and then our on-air studios, which might be somebody's bedroom or a home office or a family room, look very different. But every place we can, we're trying to use the same technology, whether it's a Bridget, a Via, and, you know, we've even gone to some reported apps because it leaves us in the same place. And we've really tried not to mix in other technologies, because I've got a challenge of 2 different automation systems, and yet I want to keep uniformity where we can. And we trust the reliability of what we originally started with as an STL over the air IP. And so we've become very comfortable with that because we can trust it.
Okay.
So I don't know if I hit both questions, but you know, it goes back to, do we trust the technology that's there? And we very much do, because it's stable and we know how it behaves.
Let's fast forward a year from now, or to a time when this coronavirus is gone and past us. Maybe not economically, but it's, you know, from a health standpoint. Do you see, from a worldview, broadcasters still using technology at home to continue to broadcast at home, or do you see everybody coming back to the studio?
I really want to get people back in the studio, because our business is based on personal relationships. But that being said, I give you an example of where it doesn't make sense. And now what we've learned, we're going to build our business out in a better way. So one of the gentlemen who was an announcer probably 30 years ago in Lafayette had been doing air work for us for the last several years on one of our stations in Muncie. And then I also use him to do weather, because he's today a meteorologist on another one of our stations. So it absolutely makes sense for us to not cobble something together like we have been for him for the last several years, but not only are we making him more productive by providing him a uniform way to reach each one of our radio stations, but we're getting better product out of him, because he only has to spend so much time producing his work product, and it's being delivered in a way that we all are comfortable with. And so one of our really good talents, a gentleman named Paul Poteet, now has better access to all of our facilities because of this.
Okay. Well, yeah, and I think that definitely does answer that right on the head in that terms of that question. Sorry. But I guess to kind of wrap up this conversation here, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, Jay, but do you have any advice or any additional thoughts that you would give and want to share to other people who are in your position or who are getting ready to potentially go into that quarantine status?
So I think the most important thing is that everybody has to get comfortable knowing they don't have all the answers, but really push towards a desired outcome. We got to this point really quickly because we said we were going to do it, and we all held ourselves to it. But we were open to saying we're going to make mistakes with doing this, but you can't slow down because you're never going to get to the desired pace if you don't push for it really hard. And you got to be okay making mistakes. You know, and one of the things I said early on is you got to trust some partners outside of your organization. We've been fortunate to have a number of good ones over the years, and I would count your group, Tieline, as one of those partners because you help us think through things. And that's really important. And before we make decisions or before we really embark on something that's new, we reach out to folks. And I know we've done it with you a number of times, Jacob, and that's a big value in terms, because there's a lot of products that are similar and nothing's completely interchangeable, but technology is to a degree interchangeable. So it comes back to how is something going to get done? And it goes, for us, in our case with you guys, it goes back to that relationship. Do we have somebody that we know is going to help us think through it and stand behind something when it's not working the way we thought it would? So.
Yeah, and you're right. That's definitely one of the things that we at least try to do here, is definitely try to build up the relationship. Because you're right, business these days, it's all about that personal relationship with people, and that helps build that trust of that product. Well, again, thank you everybody for tuning in to this week's edition of our new video podcast, where we talk with some of our customers and some other radio influencers around the world. My name's Jacob Daniluck, and this has been Doug Ferber. And thank you so much, Jay Chapman, for joining us this week.